The ancient Greeks whispered of a place that shouldn't have existed. A realm beyond the bitter north wind where summer light never faded and people lived without war, without hunger, without the slow decay of time itself. They called it Hyperborea, and for thousands of years, scholars have dismissed it as nothing more than mythological fantasy. But what if they were wrong? Hidden beneath layers of ice and centuries of academic skepticism lies evidence that could shatter everything we think we know about human history. Strange maps that show coastlines where only frozen wasteland exists today. Archaeological discoveries in the Arctic that predate known civilizations by thousands of years. Genetic markers that trace impossible migration routes through lands that were supposedly uninhabitable. The story of Hyperborea isn't just about one lost civilization. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of our past, a missing chapter that could explain why ancient cultures separated by vast oceans share identical symbols, similar flood myths, and astronomical knowledge they shouldn't have possessed. Tonight, we're going to follow the trail of evidence that mainstream archaeology would prefer to ignore. If you're drawn to mysteries that challenge conventional wisdom, stories that exist in the spaces between what we're taught and what the evidence actually shows, then you're in the right place. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing our global community light up across different time zones as we explore these hidden corners of history together. The first clue that Hyperborea might be more than myth comes from an unexpected source. Not from dusty academic papers or archaeological reports, but from the words of ancient poets who wrote with startling precision about a place they claimed never to have seen. Pindar, the greatest lyric poet of ancient Greece, described the Hyperboreans as people who lived beyond the reach of the north wind in a land where the sun never set during summer months. He wrote of rivers that never froze, of fields that needed no cultivation, of temples where Apollo himself would retreat during the harsh Greek winters. These weren't vague poetic metaphors. They were specific geographical descriptions that match exactly what we now know about the Arctic Circle during certain climatic periods. Herodotus, often called the father of history, was more cautious. He admitted he had no direct proof of Hyperborea's existence, but he carefully recorded the stories that filtered down from northern traders and travelers. According to these accounts, somewhere beyond the land of the Scythians lay a people who lived in perpetual summer light, sending sacred offerings south through a chain of intermediaries that eventually reached the Greek island of Delos. Here's where it gets interesting. The Greeks described Hyperborea's light in ways that perfectly match the phenomenon of the midnight sun, where the sun doesn't set for weeks during Arctic summers. They wrote about this with scientific accuracy, describing how the sun would trace a circle above the horizon, rather than rising and setting normally. But the Greeks themselves lived in Mediterranean latitudes, where such a thing was impossible to observe directly. So how did they know? How could ancient poets describe with pinpoint accuracy a natural phenomenon that occurs only in the far north, in regions they supposedly never visited? The answer might lie in something historians have long overlooked. The Greeks weren't just receiving stories about Hyperborea. They were receiving physical evidence. Ancient sources mention sacred offerings wrapped in wheat straw that would arrive at Greek temples, carried by a relay system that stretched from the mysterious north all the way to the Mediterranean. These weren't symbolic gifts. They were real objects that traveled real trade routes, suggesting contact between the Greek world and whatever civilization existed in the far north. But if Hyperborea was just a myth, why do we find similar stories scattered across cultures that had no contact with ancient Greece? The Celts spoke of Tir na Nog, a land of eternal youth located across a cold northern sea. Norse sagas describe Thule, a fertile land 6 days' sail north of Britain where the summer sun barely set. Siberian peoples have oral traditions about ancestors who came from radiant lands to the north where the sun's path was different and the air was soft. These aren't copycat stories. They're independent cultural memories that share too many specific details to be coincidental. The direction is always northward. The light is always unusual. The land is always described as more abundant and hospitable than the harsh northern regions these cultures actually inhabited. Modern science has given us tools the ancients never had, and what we've discovered should make us reconsider everything. Ice core samples from Greenland reveal that during certain warm intervals in the late Pleistocene period, the Arctic was dramatically different from the frozen wasteland we see today. Pollen trapped in ancient ice tells us about birch forests and willow groves that existed where now there's only permafrost. These weren't brief warm spells. Some lasted for centuries, long enough for complex societies to develop and flourish. During these periods, vast areas of the Arctic Ocean that are now permanently frozen would have been navigable. Coastal plains that are now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water would have provided rich hunting grounds and settlement areas. We're not talking about a slightly warmer Arctic. We're talking about a completely different world. Scientists have identified periods when average temperatures in Greenland rose by as much as 14 degrees Celsius in just a few decades. Such dramatic warming would have transformed the high Arctic into something resembling the mammoth steppes that once stretched across Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada. These steppes weren't barren tundra. They were rich grasslands that supported one of the highest biomasses of large animals ever known. Mammoth herds so vast their bones still litter. Arctic islands thousands of years after the last ice age. Wild horses, woolly rhinoceros, and giant bison roamed in numbers that would have made the African savanna look sparse by comparison. And where large animals thrived, humans could thrive too. Archaeological evidence proves that people were living in the high Arctic much earlier than previously thought. The Yana rhinoceros horn site in Siberia shows human habitation dating back 27,000 years, deep into the last glacial maximum. These weren't desperate survivors huddling around fires. They were skilled craftspeople making intricate tools, ornamental beads, and decorative engravings. On Zhukov Island in the East Siberian Sea, excavations have revealed permanent settlements dating back 8,000 years. The people who lived there hunted polar bears and reindeer, built insulated houses, and crafted wooden sleds for long-distance travel. Most remarkably, they were trading with cultures hundreds of miles away, as evidenced by obsidian blades that could only have come from distant volcanic sources. This paints a picture of the ancient Arctic that's completely at odds with our modern assumptions. Instead of an empty wasteland at the edge of the world, we're looking at a dynamic landscape that could have supported complex societies, extensive trade networks, and the kind of cultural achievements that might have given rise to the Hyperborean legends. But here's what makes this truly significant. Many of these Arctic settlements show evidence of sudden abandonment around 12,900 years ago, coinciding with a dramatic climate event known as the Younger Dryas. This was a rapid return to near-glacial conditions that lasted for over 1,000 years, effectively ending the warm period that had made northern civilizations possible. Imagine what this would have meant for people living in the Arctic. Within a single human lifetime, temperatures plummeted, ice sheets advanced, and the rich ecosystems that had supported their way of life simply vanished. Those who survived would have been forced to migrate southward, carrying with them only memories of their lost homeland. These climate refugees wouldn't have just brought genetic material into southern populations. They would have carried knowledge, technologies, and most importantly, stories. Stories about a land beyond the north wind, where the sun never set, where life was abundant, where winter's grip was gentle. Over generations, these stories would evolve from historical accounts into mythological narratives, preserved in the oral traditions of cultures across the Northern Hemisphere. This is how climate becomes myth, this realm. And this might explain why the ancient Greeks is how a real place becomes a legendary. Describe Arctic phenomena with such accuracy. They weren't inventing Hyperborea. They were preserving a cultural memory of it, passed down through countless generations of storytellers who kept alive the echo of a world that ice had claimed. The evidence doesn't stop with climate data and archaeological sites. Modern genetics has revealed migration patterns that support the idea of population movements from high latitudes into more temperate regions. Haplogroup Q, shared between Siberian groups and Native Americans, suggests common ancestry that passed through the high north thousands of years ago. More mysteriously, haplogroup X appears in both European and certain Native American populations, in patterns that aren't fully explained by known migration routes. These genetic threads hint at a complex web of movements through Arctic corridors during the late Pleistocene, exactly when the climate data shows the far north would have been most habitable. If Hyperborea existed as a real place rather than a myth, its people wouldn't have simply vanished when the ice returned. They would have dispersed, carrying their genetic signatures into the populations they joined. But genetics only tells part of the story. The real evidence for Hyperborean influence might lie in something far more subtle and far more persistent than DNA. It might lie in the way human cultures across the globe approach the fundamental questions of astronomy, architecture, and sacred geometry. Consider the astronomical alignments found in ancient structures worldwide. From Stonehenge to the pyramids of Egypt, from the temples of Angkor Wat to the medicine wheels of North America, prehistoric builders seemed obsessed with tracking the movements of celestial bodies with extraordinary precision. They built monuments that could predict eclipses, mark solstices, and follow the slow procession of the Earth's axis across millennia. This level of astronomical sophistication didn't develop in isolation. It required generations of careful observation, mathematical calculation, and cultural continuity. Most importantly, it required a perspective on the sky that would have been most natural to people living at high latitudes, where the sun's behavior is most extreme and the circumpolar stars never set. In the Arctic, astronomical observation isn't just academic curiosity, it's survival. Knowing precisely when the sun will return after months of darkness could mean the difference between life and death. Understanding the subtle changes in stellar positions over decades could provide crucial information about long-term climate cycles. For people living at the edge of the habitable world, the sky wasn't just beautiful, it was essential. This astronomical knowledge might be the real legacy of Hyperborea, not grand cities or advanced technologies, but a deep understanding of celestial mechanics that spread across the globe as Arctic peoples migrated to more hospitable regions. Each culture would have adapted this knowledge to their local needs, but the underlying principles would have remained the same. The spiral petroglyphs found across northern Eurasia, the solar symbols that appear in Bronze Age art from Central Asia to the Americas, the recurring motifs of circles, wheels, and concentric rings that show up in sacred sites across multiple continents. These might not be independent inventions. They might be fragments of a shared symbolic language that originated in the observatories of the ancient Arctic. What's most striking about these astronomical alignments isn't just their precision, but their consistency across impossible distances. The builders of Stonehenge had no contact with the pyramid architects of Egypt, yet both structures demonstrate identical understanding of solar mechanics and stellar positioning. The medicine wheels of the North American plains echo the same geometric principles found in the stone circles of Scotland, despite being separated by an ocean and thousands of years. This isn't convergent evolution. This is inherited knowledge, passed down through migration routes that conventional archaeology refuses to acknowledge. The fingerprints of Arctic astronomy appear everywhere once you know how to look for them. But astronomical knowledge wasn't the only thing these climate refugees carried south. They brought with them architectural concepts that would profoundly influence human civilization for millennia to come. The circular city designs, described in classical sources about Hyperborea, weren't just poetic fantasy. They were echoes of a real building tradition that can be traced across the archaeological record. Look at the recurring pattern of circular settlements found throughout Northern Europe and Asia. The ring forts of Ireland, the circular enclosures of Central Asian Bronze Age cultures, the radial street patterns found in certain Mississippian sites in North America. These aren't random architectural choices. They're variations on a theme that originated in environments where circular design wasn't just aesthetic, but functional. In the Arctic, circular architecture makes perfect sense. It minimizes heat loss, maximizes structural stability against wind loads, and creates natural gathering spaces around central hearths. More importantly, circular designs naturally align with celestial observations. When your survival depends on tracking the sun's path across seasons, building in circles that mirror solar movement becomes both practical and sacred. The great circular city that classical sources described as Hyperborea's capital might have been real. Not a single massive metropolis, but a building tradition that spread across the Arctic during warm periods and then migrated south with climate refugees. Each culture would have adapted the basic design to local materials and conditions, but the underlying concept would have remained constant. Sacred geometry wasn't just about circles. The Hyperborean legacy might be visible in the recurring use of specific proportions and ratios found in ancient architecture worldwide. The golden ratio that appears in Greek temples, Egyptian pyramids, and Gothic cathedrals. The mathematical relationships that govern the spacing of megalithic monuments. The harmonic proportions that seem to resonate through prehistoric art and architecture across continents. These weren't discovered independently by dozens of separate cultures. They were taught, transmitted, and preserved by people who understood that certain geometric relationships held deeper significance than mere aesthetics. Mathematics wasn't just calculation to them, it was a language for describing the fundamental harmonies that governed both earthly and celestial realms. The most compelling evidence for this transmission comes from an unexpected source: sound. Modern acoustic analysis of ancient structures has revealed that many were designed with sophisticated understanding of resonance and harmonic frequencies. The stone chambers of Newgrange in Ireland resonate at 111 Hz. The Halsaflieni Hypogeum in Malta demonstrates complex acoustic engineering that amplifies certain frequencies while dampening others. Even the Great Pyramid shows evidence of intentional acoustic design. This isn't coincidence. Specific frequencies have measurable effects on human consciousness and perception. Hertz, the frequency found in many ancient chambers, has been shown to activate areas of the brain associated with enhanced awareness and altered states. The builders weren't just creating impressive monuments. They were engineering consciousness-altering environments using principles of acoustics that modern science is only beginning to understand. Where would such knowledge have originated? In cultures that lived through long Arctic winters, sound would have taken on profound significance. When visual cues are limited by months of darkness, acoustic phenomena become crucial for navigation, communication, and psychological well-being. The aurora borealis itself produces sounds, electromagnetic disturbances that can be heard as crackling, humming, or whistling. People living under the midnight sun would have developed extraordinary sensitivity to the relationship between sound, space, and consciousness. This acoustic knowledge, like the astronomical wisdom and geometric principles, would have traveled south with migrating populations. Each culture would have adapted it to their local materials and needs, but the underlying understanding would have remained. The resonant chambers found in megalithic sites worldwide might be the last echoes of Hyperborean sound technology, preserved in stone long after the knowledge of their true purpose was forgotten. But sound wasn't the only invisible technology these ancient peoples might have mastered. Recent discoveries suggest they may have understood principles of magnetism and earth energy that mainstream science has barely begun to explore. Many ancient sites are located on areas of unusual geomagnetic activity. Dowsers have long claimed that stone circles and megalithic monuments sit on underground watercourses or energy lines. Satellite magnetometry has revealed that numerous prehistoric sites show magnetic anomalies that can't be explained by local geology alone. The builders weren't just choosing these locations randomly, they were selecting sites with specific energetic properties that enhance the function of their monuments, whether for astronomical observation, acoustic resonance, or purposes we haven't yet discovered. They demonstrated sensitivity to subtle environmental forces that our technology is only now sophisticated enough to detect. This raises disturbing questions about what we've lost. If Hyperborea was real, if advanced Arctic civilizations existed during warm periods and then dispersed when the ice returned, what other knowledge disappeared with them? What technologies, philosophies, or scientific principles were preserved only in fragments scattered across cultures that no longer understood their original context? The answer might be hidden in plain sight, embedded in the myths and traditions that every culture carries. The stories of golden ages when humans lived in harmony with natural forces. The legends of wise teachers who came from distant lands, bringing knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. The persistent myths of worldwide floods that destroyed advanced civilizations and forced survivors to begin again. These aren't just stories. They're cultural DNA, genetic memories encoded in narrative form. When oral traditions across the globe describe similar catastrophes, similar migrations, similar patterns of knowledge transfer, we're not looking at coincidence. We're looking at the scattered remains of historical events so profound they left permanent marks on human consciousness. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate event. It was a civilizational reset, a moment when sea levels rose, ice sheets advanced, and entire ecosystems vanished within human lifespans. Any sophisticated cultures that had developed during the preceding warm period would have faced an existential crisis. Some groups might have found refuge in more temperate regions, bringing their knowledge with them. Others might have adapted to the new conditions, preserving what they could in simplified forms. Still others might have simply disappeared, leaving only traces in the geological record and the deepest layers of human memory. This pattern of catastrophic change followed by cultural diaspora might not be unique to the end of the Ice Age. Climate data suggests that similar events have occurred multiple times throughout human history. Rapid warming periods that opened new territories to settlement, followed by equally rapid cooling that forced mass migrations. Each cycle would have created opportunities for civilizations to develop and flourish, only to be disrupted when conditions changed. Hyperborea might have been just one example of this recurring pattern. A high-latitude civilization that thrived during a warm interval, developed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and natural forces, and then dispersed when climate change made their homeland uninhabitable. Their legacy wouldn't be found in monumental ruins buried under ice. It would be found in the knowledge systems, symbolic languages, and cultural practices they passed on to the societies they joined. This perspective transforms how we understand human prehistory. Instead of a simple progression from primitive to advanced, we might be looking at a series of rises and falls, golden ages followed by dark ages, sophisticated knowledge repeatedly gained, lost, and partially recovered. Each cycle would preserve fragments of earlier wisdom while adding new discoveries, creating the complex layering of traditions we see in ancient cultures worldwide. The implications extend far beyond archaeology. If Hyperborean-level civilizations existed and then vanished due to climate change, what does that tell us about our own trajectory? We're currently experiencing another period of rapid climate shift, though this time driven by human activity rather than natural cycles. The ice sheets that buried Hyperborea are now melting, revealing landscapes that had been frozen for millennia. As these ancient lands emerge from their icy sleep, what might we discover? Preserved settlements that could rewrite our understanding of human capabilities, technologies that could solve modern problems, or simply confirmation that even the most advanced civilizations are vulnerable to the forces of planetary change. The search for Hyperborea isn't just about satisfying historical curiosity, it's about understanding the full scope of human potential and the cyclical nature of civilizational development. Every discovery in the melting Arctic, every genetic analysis that reveals unexpected migration patterns, every acoustic study of ancient monuments adds another piece to a puzzle that could fundamentally alter our conception of who we are and where we came from. But perhaps the most profound implication is the simplest one. If Hyperborea was real, if advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times throughout human history, then we are not the first to face the challenges of climate change, resource depletion, and technological complexity. Others have walked this path before us, and some have found ways to preserve their most important knowledge through periods of catastrophic change. Their survival strategies might be encoded in the very myths and traditions we've dismissed as primitive superstition. The stories of floods and migrations, the astronomical alignments and geometric principles, the acoustic technologies and geomagnetic sensitivities. These might not be relics of a less sophisticated past. They might be messages from a more sophisticated one. Preservation systems designed to transmit crucial knowledge across the gaps created by civilizational collapse. The evidence becomes more unsettling when you examine what happened to the technologies these ancient peoples possessed. Modern engineers studying megalithic sites have discovered construction techniques that we still struggle to replicate today. The precision-fitted stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, cut so perfectly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. The massive trilithon blocks at Baalbek, some weighing over 800 tons, moved and positioned with an accuracy that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. These weren't isolated achievements. Similar construction methods appear across continents, separated by thousands of miles and supposedly thousands of years. The builders seem to share not just architectural knowledge, but manufacturing standards, standardized measurements that appear in structures from Britain to Bolivia. Stone-cutting techniques that produce identical results, whether applied to granite in Scotland or limestone in Lebanon. This consistency suggests something far more organized than random cultural exchange. It points to a systematic preservation of technical knowledge, passed down through networks that spanned the globe. The kind of knowledge transfer you'd expect from a civilization that knew it was facing extinction and needed to preserve its most crucial innovations. Consider the implications. If Hyperborean refugees carried advanced construction techniques south during the Younger Dryas, they wouldn't have just shared these methods randomly. They would have established training centers, technical schools and craft guilds designed to maintain standards across generations. The megalithic sites scattered across Europe, Asia, and the Americas might not be independent cultural achievements. They might be the surviving campuses of an ancient technical education system. The acoustic properties we discussed earlier take on new significance in this context. These weren't just consciousness-altering chambers. They were testing facilities designed to verify that construction met specific resonant frequencies. The builders weren't just creating monuments. They were maintaining quality control standards that ensured their structures would function properly across different geographical locations. But acoustic engineering was just one aspect of a much larger technological system. Recent analysis of ancient sites has revealed evidence of sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic phenomena. Stone circles positioned to amplify natural magnetic fields. Underground chambers that seem designed to shield occupants from electromagnetic interference. Sacred sites that demonstrate awareness of geomagnetic anomalies invisible to normal human senses. The builders weren't working with primitive tools and superstitious beliefs. They were applying scientific principles that we're only beginning to rediscover. Their technology wasn't based on metal and mechanics like ours, but on harmony and resonance. They understood that the Earth itself was a dynamic system of energy flows, and they built their structures to interface with these natural forces. This bio-integrated approach to technology makes perfect sense for people who had lived through climate catastrophe. When your metal tools can freeze and shatter, when your mechanical systems can be buried under advancing ice sheets, you develop technologies that work with natural processes rather than against them. Stone doesn't break down. Acoustic principles don't change. Astronomical alignments remain constant across millennia. The Hyperboreans might have been the ultimate sustainable civilization, creating technologies that could survive any conceivable disaster. Their monuments weren't just buildings, they were information storage systems, designed to preserve crucial knowledge in forms that would remain accessible even after the parent culture vanished. This explains why megalithic sites seem to encode multiple layers of information simultaneously. The astronomical alignments that mark seasonal changes, the geometric proportions that embody mathematical constants, the acoustic properties that alter consciousness, the magnetic anomalies that suggest electromagnetic applications we haven't yet deciphered. These weren't separate functions. They were integrated aspects of a comprehensive knowledge preservation system. The builders were creating libraries, but not libraries of books. They were creating libraries of experience, where knowledge could be accessed through direct interaction with precisely engineered environments. Walking through these structures, participating in their acoustic properties, observing their astronomical alignments, would have transmitted information more effectively than any written text. This experiential approach to knowledge transfer helps explain another mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Why do ancient cultures worldwide share such specific technical knowledge, despite having no apparent means of communication? The answer might be that they didn't need to communicate. They all had access to the same information storage system embedded in the landscape itself. The stone circles, the burial chambers, the temple complexes scattered across continents weren't built by different cultures working independently. They were built by the same culture, or rather by cultures that had inherited the same technical manual. The variations we see aren't evidence of separate origins. They're regional adaptations of a standardized design, modified to work with local materials and geographical conditions. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. If this global knowledge preservation system existed, what happened to it? Why did the technical standards gradually decline over time? Why did later cultures build cruder imitations of earlier masterworks, as if they were working from incomplete instructions? The answer might lie in the very nature of experiential knowledge. Unlike written information, which can be copied and distributed, experiential knowledge requires direct access to the original sources. If the network of technical training sites was disrupted, if the master builders who understood the complete system were killed or displaced, the knowledge would begin to fragment immediately. Each generation would preserve what they could understand, but the deeper principles would gradually be lost. The acoustic engineering would become ritual chanting. The astronomical alignments would become religious ceremonies. The electromagnetic applications would become mystical practices. The technology would survive, but its scientific foundation would be forgotten. This process of technological decay is visible in the archaeological record. Early megalithic sites demonstrate sophisticated engineering that later sites attempt to copy but can't quite achieve. The precision gradually degrades. The acoustic properties become less refined. The astronomical alignments become less accurate. It's as if each generation was working from increasingly corrupted copies of an original blueprint. The implications are staggering. We might be looking at the remains of a global technological civilization that was more advanced in certain areas than our own. Not advanced in the sense of having more powerful machines, but advanced in the sense of understanding principles that we've completely overlooked. They developed sustainable technologies that could function for thousands of years without maintenance. that could preserve information across multiple civilizational collapses, that could interface directly with planetary energy systems. Modern science is just beginning to rediscover some of these principles. Researchers studying biomimetics are learning to copy natural systems. Acoustic engineers are exploring the therapeutic applications of specific frequencies. Geologists are mapping the Earth's electromagnetic field with unprecedented precision. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding technologies that our ancestors took for granted, but we're approaching these discoveries from a completely different direction. Where the ancients seem to have developed holistic systems that integrated multiple natural forces, we're developing specialized technologies that address individual problems. Where they created sustainable solutions that could last millennia, we create disposable solutions that need constant replacement. The contrast suggests that we might be missing something fundamental about the nature of technology itself. The Hyperborean approach wasn't about dominating natural forces, but about harmonizing with them. Their structures weren't imposed on the landscape, but grown from it. Their technologies weren't separate from their environment, but integrated with it. This integration extended beyond the physical realm into consciousness itself. The acoustic properties that altered brainwave patterns, the geometric proportions that induced specific psychological states, the astronomical alignments that synchronized human awareness with cosmic cycles. The builders weren't just preserving technical knowledge, they were preserving states of consciousness that made advanced technical knowledge possible. Here's where modern neuroscience provides unexpected confirmation of ancient practices. Research has shown that certain brainwave patterns enhance creativity, problem-solving ability, and access to intuitive insights. The frequencies that ancient chambers were tuned to correspond exactly to these optimal consciousness states. The builders weren't just creating impressive monuments, they were engineering cognitive enhancement environments. This suggests that the decline of megalithic civilization wasn't just about losing technical knowledge, it was about losing access to the states of consciousness that made such knowledge comprehensible. As the acoustic chambers fell into disuse, as the astronomical observations became mere ritual, as the geometric proportions were copied without understanding, the mental clarity required for advanced technical work gradually disappeared. The implications extend far beyond archaeology into fundamental questions about human potential. If consciousness-enhancing environments were once commonplace, if our ancestors routinely accessed mental states that we consider exceptional or mystical, then our current limitations might be self-imposed. We might have the same cognitive capabilities they had, but we lack the environmental support systems that made those capabilities accessible. This perspective transforms how we understand ancient achievements. The precision of megalithic construction, the accuracy of astronomical observations, the sophistication of acoustic engineering. These weren't the products of primitive people working with crude tools. These were the products of enhanced human consciousness, working with precisely designed environmental amplifiers. The question becomes, what else were they capable of that we've forgotten how to do? What other applications of consciousness technology integration did they develop? What other natural forces did they learn to harness through mental environmental resonance? The answers might be encoded in the very sites we've been discussing, waiting for us to develop the perceptual clarity necessary to decode them. Each megalithic monument might contain layers of information that become accessible only when approached with the right combination of technical knowledge and consciousness, altering environmental conditions. This creates a fascinating paradox. To fully understand ancient technology, we might need to recreate ancient consciousness states. To recreate ancient consciousness states, we might need to understand ancient technology. The knowledge system was designed as an integrated whole, where technical and psychological elements reinforced each other in ways that made the complete system greater than the sum of its parts. Breaking this cycle of mutual dependence might require a fundamentally different approach to both archaeology and consciousness research. Instead of studying ancient sites as historical artifacts, we might need to study them as functional technologies that are still operational. Instead of analyzing consciousness as a purely internal phenomenon, we might need to understand it as an environmental interaction that can be precisely engineered. Some researchers are already moving in this direction. Acoustic archaeologists are measuring the sound properties of ancient chambers and testing their effects on modern subjects. Archaeoastronomers are recreating ancient observation techniques and discovering previously unknown astronomical phenomena. Consciousness researchers are exploring how environmental factors influence mental states and cognitive performance. Each line of investigation is revealing that ancient peoples possessed far more sophisticated knowledge than conventional archaeology suggests. They weren't primitive ancestors struggling with basic survival. They were the inheritors of advanced civilizations who had learned to work with natural forces in ways that we're only beginning to understand. But this knowledge didn't disappear completely. It went underground, preserved in mystery schools, secret societies, and esoteric traditions that maintained fragments of the original system across millennia. The acoustic principles survived in musical traditions. The astronomical knowledge survived in astrological systems. The geometric ratios survived in architectural schools. The consciousness-altering techniques survived in meditation practices. The fragmentation was intentional. When the main technical infrastructure collapsed during the Younger Dryas, the survivors scattered different aspects of the knowledge across multiple preservation systems. No single tradition maintained the complete system, but each preserved crucial elements that could potentially be recombined by future generations who had developed the wisdom to use them responsibly. We might be those future generations. Our current technological capabilities, combined with our growing understanding of consciousness and environmental interaction, might finally give us the tools necessary to reassemble the scattered fragments of Hyperborean knowledge. But reassembly isn't just a technical challenge. It's a test of our maturity as a species. The same knowledge that could solve our environmental problems could also be used to create unprecedented destruction. The same consciousness enhancement techniques that could expand human potential could also be used for manipulation and control. The same understanding of planetary energy systems that could provide sustainable power could also be used to destabilize entire ecosystems. This might be why the knowledge was fragmented in the first place. The survivors of the last catastrophic climate change understood that advanced technology without corresponding wisdom leads inevitably to self-destruction. They designed their preservation system to require not just technical competence, but ethical development. Only a civilization that had learned to balance power with responsibility would be able to successfully reassemble and apply their legacy. The question facing us now is whether we've developed that balance. Are we mature enough as a species to handle technologies that work directly with planetary and consciousness systems? Can we learn from the mistakes that led to previous civilizational collapses? Do we have the wisdom to use Hyperborean knowledge to create sustainable abundance rather than accelerated destruction? The answer might depend on how we approach the rediscovery process itself. If we treat ancient knowledge as something to be exploited for competitive advantage, we'll likely repeat the patterns that led to previous collapses. If we treat it as something to be integrated with respect for its original purposes, we might finally break the cycle of rise and fall that has characterized human civilization for millennia. The choice is ours, but we might not have unlimited time to make it. Climate change is accelerating. Social tensions are increasing. The same pressures that triggered previous civilizational transitions are building once again. We can either use this crisis as an opportunity to rediscover sustainable technologies and consciousness enhancement systems, or we can continue on our current path toward another catastrophic reset. The evidence suggests that we're not the first civilization to face this choice, and we probably won't be the last. But we might be the first to face it with both the technical capabilities and the historical awareness necessary to choose wisely. The knowledge is there, preserved in stone and story, waiting for us to develop the clarity to perceive it and the wisdom to apply it. Hyperborea isn't just ancient history, it's a template for our future, a demonstration that human civilization can develop technologies that enhance rather than degrade planetary systems. But accessing that template requires more than archaeological investigation. It requires a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between consciousness, technology, and environment. The next phase of human development might not involve building more powerful machines, but learning to work more harmoniously with the forces that are already available. The ancients understood something we've forgotten, that the most sophisticated technologies are the ones that amplify natural processes rather than replacing them. That shift in perspective becomes even more crucial when we examine what happened to the survivors who carried Hyperborean knowledge south. These weren't just random refugees fleeing climate catastrophe. They were the keepers of systematic wisdom, people who understood that their role was to preserve and transmit crucial information across the dark ages that were coming. The dispersal patterns tell a remarkable story. Genetic evidence shows these populations didn't just scatter randomly across the landscape, they moved with purpose, establishing settlements at specific locations that would become the foundation sites for later civilizations. The Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Basin, the highlands of Peru. Each of these regions shows evidence of sudden technological advancement that coincides with the arrival of new genetic markers from northern populations. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. These settlements weren't just placed randomly in fertile areas, they were positioned at precise geographical coordinates that created a global network of information exchange. The mathematical relationships between major ancient sites reveal a level of coordination that suggests central planning on a planetary scale. Consider the distances between key megalithic locations. Stonehenge to the Great Pyramid, the Great Pyramid to Angkor Wat, Angkor Wat to Easter Island. When you calculate these distances using ancient measurement systems, you find repeating mathematical ratios that can't be coincidental. The builders weren't just creating local monuments, they were establishing nodes in a worldwide communication network. This network operated on principles we're only now beginning to understand. Recent research in quantum physics suggests that information can be transmitted instantaneously across vast distances through quantum entanglement. The ancient builders might have understood similar principles, using the Earth's magnetic field and crystalline structures to create communication pathways that operated faster than any physical messenger could travel. The evidence lies hidden in the materials they chose. Granite contains high concentrations of quartz crystal, which has piezoelectric properties that can generate electrical fields under pressure. Many megalithic sites are built with specific types of stone that demonstrate unusual electromagnetic characteristics. The builders weren't just selecting materials for durability, they were creating technological infrastructure. Underwater archaeology has revealed another layer of this network. Submerged structures off the coasts of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean show construction techniques identical to those found at land-based megalithic sites. These weren't separate civilizations. They were connected components of the same system, linked by sea routes that are now drowned beneath rising ocean levels. The flooding that ended the last ice age didn't just destroy coastal settlements. It severed the maritime connections that had allowed the global network to function as an integrated whole. The surviving inland nodes gradually lost contact with each other, and the system began to fragment into isolated regional cultures. This fragmentation process is visible in the archaeological record as a gradual decline in construction quality and astronomical precision. Each generation preserved what they could understand, but without access to the complete network, the deeper principles were inevitably lost. The acoustic chambers became echo chambers, the astronomical alignments became ritual calendars, the electromagnetic applications became mysterious ceremonies. The speed of this decline suggests that the original knowledge was more fragile than we might expect. Unlike written information, which can be copied and distributed, experiential knowledge requires direct transmission from teacher to student. When the master builders who understood the complete system were cut off from their training centers, their expertise died with them. But the Hyperborean refugees had anticipated this problem. They designed multiple backup systems to preserve essential knowledge across potential disruptions. The mathematical ratios encoded in architectural proportions, the astronomical data embedded in mythological narratives, the technical procedures disguised as religious rituals. Even if the active network failed, passive storage systems would continue to transmit information to future generations, who developed the sophistication to decode them. Sacred geometry represents one of these backup systems. The golden ratio, pi, and other mathematical constants appear repeatedly in ancient structures worldwide, encoded in ways that ensure their preservation, even if the original builder's intentions are forgotten. Future mathematicians would inevitably rediscover these relationships and potentially recognize their significance as keys to ancient technical knowledge. Musical traditions preserve another layer of backup information. The harmonic ratios that create pleasing sounds correspond exactly to the proportions found in megalithic architecture. Traditional scales and tuning systems from cultures across the globe encode the same mathematical relationships that govern acoustic engineering in ancient chambers. Music wasn't just entertainment for these peoples. It was a mnemonic device for preserving technical specifications. Mythological narratives served as the most sophisticated backup system of all. Stories about gods who came from the north bringing gifts of civilization, floods that destroyed advanced societies, heroes who preserved crucial knowledge through dark ages. These weren't just entertainment or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. They were information storage protocols designed to maintain historical data across multiple civilizational collapses. The recurring motifs make sense when viewed from this perspective. The world tree that connects Earth and sky represents the axis mundi, the polar axis around which astronomical observations are organized. The cosmic egg from which all life emerges represents the spherical Earth as understood by people who had mapped its complete geometry. The great flood that destroys and renews the world represents the cyclical climate changes that periodically reset civilizational development. These stories weren't created by primitive peoples trying to understand mysterious natural forces. They were created by sophisticated peoples trying to preserve scientific knowledge in forms that would survive the collapse of their technical infrastructure. The mythological framework made the information memorable and culturally valuable, ensuring its transmission across generations who might not understand its literal significance. This explains why creation myths from unconnected cultures share such specific details. They're not drawing on universal psychological archetypes. They're preserving fragments of the same historical events, filtered through different cultural lenses, but maintaining core factual elements: the separation of earth and sky, the emergence of land from water, the appearance of light in darkness. These are descriptions of planetary formation and climate change, encoded in narrative form. The serpent or dragon that appears in mythologies worldwide represents the Earth's magnetic field, visualized as energy flows that spiral around the planet's axis. The hero who slays the dragon represents human mastery of electromagnetic forces. The treasure the dragon guards represents the technological knowledge that becomes accessible once these forces are understood. Even the most seemingly fantastic elements carry technical information. Flying chariots and aerial vehicles in ancient texts describe technologies based on electromagnetic levitation rather than mechanical propulsion. Weapons that destroy with light and sound describe applications of focused energy that work through resonance rather than brute force. Cities that rise from the earth and sink beneath the waves describe construction techniques that integrate with geological processes rather than fighting against them. The consistency of these descriptions across cultures suggests they're not imaginative fiction, but corrupted technical manuals. The original instructions for building and operating advanced technologies were preserved in mythological form when the societies that created them could no longer maintain them actively. This raises profound questions about the nature of technological development. We assume that advancement requires accumulating complexity, building more sophisticated machines and systems. But the Hyperborean approach suggests a different model, where true advancement means learning to work more elegantly with existing natural forces. Their technologies weren't additions to the natural world, but integrations with it. Instead of fighting gravity, they learned to channel it. Instead of resisting magnetic fields, they learned to ride them. Instead of blocking electromagnetic radiation, they learned to focus it. Their most advanced achievements were indistinguishable from natural phenomena because they were natural phenomena, precisely guided rather than artificially created. This integration extended into social organization as well. The circular city designs weren't just architectural preferences, but social technologies that created stable, egalitarian communities. The absence of monumental palaces and royal tombs in many ancient sites suggests power structures based on knowledge and competence, rather than hereditary authority or accumulated wealth. The master builders weren't rulers in our sense, but facilitators. People whose advanced understanding of natural systems allowed them to coordinate large-scale projects while maintaining social harmony. Their authority came from demonstrated ability to create beneficial results, not from political position or military force. This model of leadership helps explain another mystery that has puzzled historians. How did ancient peoples coordinate massive construction projects without the centralized bureaucracies that we assume are necessary for large-scale organization? The answer might be that they didn't need bureaucracies because they had better information systems. When everyone involved in a project has access to the same technical knowledge, when the work itself teaches participants the principles they need to understand, when the construction process creates the communication infrastructure necessary for coordination, traditional management structures become unnecessary. The project manages itself through the interactions of informed participants. This self-organizing approach to complex tasks appears throughout the archaeological record. The precision of megalithic construction suggests thousands of people working with extraordinary coordination, yet there's no evidence of the administrative apparatus that such coordination would seem to require. No armies of scribes keeping track of workers and resources. No elaborate hierarchies of supervisors and managers. Just people who understood what they were building and how to build it. The implications for modern organizational theory are staggering. We struggle to coordinate much smaller projects with massive bureaucracies, computer networks, and legal frameworks. Yet ancient peoples' route key difference might be in how information was distributed. Our systems concentrate knowledge at the top of finely completed projects that would challenge our capabilities today. Hierarchical structures, creating bottlenecks that limit efficiency using organizational methods that left no traces in the archaeological record. And introduce errors. Their systems distributed knowledge throughout the entire network, creating redundancy that prevented failures and self-correction that maintained quality. This distributed approach to knowledge management explains why ancient technical achievements seem to appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental sequences. The techniques weren't developed gradually through trial and error by local cultures. They were transmitted rapidly through educational networks that could upgrade entire populations simultaneously. The mystery schools and initiatic traditions that preserved fragments of ancient knowledge into historical times represent the remnants of these educational networks. The elaborate rituals, the progressive revelation of secrets, the emphasis on direct experience over theoretical study. These weren't arbitrary cultural traditions, but pedagogical methods designed to transmit complex technical knowledge safely and effectively. The safety protocols were crucial. Advanced technologies that work with planetary energy systems and consciousness enhancement techniques could be extremely dangerous if misapplied. The initiatic process ensured that students developed not just technical competence, but ethical maturity before gaining access to the most powerful applications. This screening process becomes even more important when we consider what some of these technologies might have been capable of. If the builders understood how to focus electromagnetic energy, they could potentially trigger earthquakes, redirect weather patterns, or even affect human consciousness on a regional scale. If they understood how to work with quantum fields, they might have accessed capabilities that we would consider impossible. The responsibility that comes with such knowledge explains why it was hidden rather than shared openly. Not because the builders wanted to maintain power over others, but because they understood that planetary-scale technologies require planetary-scale wisdom to use safely. The knowledge was preserved for future civilizations that might develop the ethical framework necessary to handle it responsibly. We might be approaching that threshold now. Our growing understanding of ecological interconnection, our recognition of consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality, our development of technologies that work with natural processes rather than against them. These suggest that we might finally be ready to reclaim our Hyperborean inheritance. But readiness isn't just about technical capability. It's about wisdom, about understanding the long-term consequences of our actions and taking responsibility for their effects on future generations. The knowledge preserved from ancient civilizations isn't just technical information. It's a test of our maturity as a species. The choice we face is the same one that every civilization has faced when it reached the threshold of planetary scale influence. Do we use our capabilities to enhance life or to accumulate power? Do we work with natural systems or try to replace them? Do we preserve knowledge for future generations or consume it for immediate benefit? The archaeological record suggests that most civilizations have failed this test, leading to the cyclical collapses that mark human history. But the persistence of the preservation systems indicates that some individuals have always understood the deeper principles and worked to maintain them across the dark ages. We are their descendants, inheritors of knowledge systems designed to function across millennial timescales. The question is whether we've developed the wisdom to activate these systems consciously, rather than waiting for another catastrophic reset to force us back to basics. The melting Arctic ice that's revealing new archaeological sites, the genetic studies that are mapping ancient migration patterns, the consciousness research that's rediscovering ancient techniques, these aren't just academic curiosities. They're components of a reactivation process that's been building for decades. The Hyperborean knowledge isn't lost, it's dormant, waiting for the right combination of technical understanding and ethical development to bring it back online. The sites, the symbols, the stories, the mathematical relationships, they're all still there, still functional, still ready to teach us what we need to know. But activation requires more than just understanding the technical aspects. It requires approaching the knowledge with the same reverence and responsibility that the original builders brought to their work. It requires seeing ourselves not as consumers of ancient wisdom, but as stewards of it, responsible for preserving and transmitting it to future generations. This stewardship role transforms how we understand our relationship to the past and future. We're not just the endpoint of historical development, but links in a chain that stretches back to the earliest human civilizations and forward to possibilities we can barely imagine. Our choices will determine whether that chain remains unbroken or whether we become another cautionary tale preserved in future mythologies. The evidence is mounting that we're living through another transition period, similar to the one that ended the last ice age. Climate systems are shifting, population movements are accelerating, and technological capabilities are approaching the threshold, where they begin to affect planetary processes directly. We're facing the same challenges that confronted our Hyperborean ancestors, and we have access to their solutions if we're wise enough to recognize and apply them. The path forward isn't about returning to some idealized past, but about integrating ancient wisdom with modern capabilities. Taking the consciousness enhancement techniques and applying them to contemporary problems. Using the sustainable technologies to address environmental challenges. Adopting the organizational principles to create more effective social systems. But integration requires discernment. Not every aspect of ancient knowledge is applicable to modern conditions. And not every modern problem has an ancient solution. The key is understanding the underlying principles rather than copying surface forms, adapting the wisdom to current circumstances, rather than trying to recreate historical conditions. This adaptation process is already underway in fields ranging from architecture to neuroscience to organizational theory, biomimetic design that copies natural structures, consciousness research that validates ancient meditation techniques, management theories that emphasize distributed decision-making and self-organizing systems. Each represents a rediscovery of principles that Hyperborean culture seems to have understood intuitively. The convergence of these rediscoveries suggests we're approaching a threshold where partial knowledge becomes integrated understanding. The fragments preserved across different fields and traditions are beginning to connect into coherent patterns that reveal the underlying unity of the original system. When that integration reaches critical mass, we might experience something unprecedented in recorded history. Not just the rise of another advanced civilization, but the conscious evolution of one that learns from all previous attempts and avoids their mistakes. A civilization that develops planetary-scale capabilities while maintaining ecological balance and social harmony. That possibility represents the true promise of Hyperborean knowledge. Not just solving immediate problems, but transforming the entire trajectory of human development. Moving from a pattern of cyclical rise and collapse to one of sustainable growth and conscious evolution. The choice is ours, but the window for making it might not remain open indefinitely. The same forces that are revealing ancient knowledge are also accelerating the conditions that could trigger another civilizational reset. We can either use this opportunity to integrate wisdom from the past with capabilities of the present, or we can continue on the path toward repeating the mistakes that led to previous collapses. The evidence suggests that our ancestors faced this choice multiple times and found ways to preserve essential knowledge even through the darkest periods. They created backup systems robust enough to survive millennia of neglect and sophisticated enough to reactivate when the right conditions emerged. Those conditions are emerging now. The question is whether we'll recognize them and respond appropriately, or whether we'll become another chapter in the long story of civilizations that had access to transformative knowledge but lacked the wisdom to apply it effectively. The answer lies not in some distant future, but in the choices we make today. Every time we choose cooperation over competition, sustainability over short-term gain, wisdom over cleverness, we move closer to activating the dormant potential that our Hyperborean ancestors embedded in the foundations of human culture. Their gift to us wasn't just technical knowledge, but a template for conscious evolution, a demonstration that human beings are capable of creating civilizations that enhance rather than degrade the planetary systems that sustain all life. The question is whether we're ready to accept that gift and the responsibilities that come with it. The ice is melting. The knowledge is emerging. The choice is ours. The deeper you dig into Hyperborean research, the more you realize we're not just looking at lost history, we're looking at suppressed history. There's a reason mainstream archaeology refuses to engage with the mounting evidence. There's a reason universities don't fund expeditions to investigate the anomalous structures emerging from melting permafrost. The implications are too dangerous for the established narrative of human development. Consider what happens when you map the locations where Hyperborean refugees establish their southern settlements. These aren't random refugee camps scattered across hospitable regions. They're strategically positioned nodes in a global information network, placed with mathematical precision that reveals planning on a scale our modern world has never attempted. The distances between major ancient sites follow specific geometric ratios that can't be coincidental. Stonehenge to Giza, Giza to Angkor Wat, Angkor Wat to Nazca. When you calculate these distances using ancient measurement systems, the same mathematical constants appear repeatedly. The builders weren't just creating impressive monuments, they were establishing communication relays in a planetary-scale infrastructure. But communication for what purpose? The answer might lie in something archaeologists consistently ignore because it doesn't fit their materialist worldview. These sites demonstrate technologies that worked with consciousness itself, engineering human awareness through environmental design. The acoustic properties that alter brainwave patterns, the electromagnetic anomalies that affect perception, the geometric proportions that induce specific psychological states. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what ancient builders somehow understood intuitively. Certain frequencies enhance creativity, problem-solving ability, and access to non-ordinary states of consciousness. The 111 Hz resonance found in chambers from Ireland to Malta. The infrasonic pulses generated by specific stone arrangements. The electromagnetic fields concentrated at particular coordinates. These weren't accidental features. They were deliberately engineered consciousness enhancement technologies, designed to amplify human mental capabilities beyond their normal limits. The precision required for such engineering suggests the builders understood principles about the relationship between mind and environment that our science is only beginning to discover. Think about what this means. If consciousness enhancement environments were commonplace in Hyperborean culture, if accessing expanded awareness was as routine as we consider using computers, then their technical achievements become comprehensible. The precision of megalithic construction, the accuracy of astronomical observations, the sophistication of acoustic engineering. These weren't superhuman accomplishments. They were normal human capabilities operating with technological amplification. The decline of these capabilities explains the mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries. How did ancient peoples coordinate massive construction projects without the administrative apparatus such coordination would seem to require? The answer is, they didn't need bureaucratic management because they had something better. Direct mind-to-mind communication enhanced by environmental technologies. Recent research in quantum consciousness suggests that individual awareness might be less isolated than we assume. Under certain conditions, particularly those involving specific electromagnetic frequencies and geometric arrangements, human consciousness might be able to access non-local information and coordinate with other minds directly. The Hyperborean network sites might have been designed specifically to create these conditions. Not just communication relays, but consciousness amplification nodes, allowing coordinated planning and execution of projects across continental distances without any physical message transmission. The mathematical precision of their placement becomes crucial when understood from this perspective. Each site needed to be positioned at exact coordinates to maintain coherent resonance across the global network. This explains another archaeological mystery that conventional theories can't address. Why do megalithic construction techniques appear simultaneously at sites separated by thousands of miles? The standard explanation involves slow cultural diffusion across trade routes, but the timing doesn't work. The techniques appear too quickly across too vast an area for physical transmission. But if consciousness-enhanced coordination was possible, if master builders could share technical knowledge directly through amplified mental states, then simultaneous development across continents becomes plausible. The knowledge wasn't traveling through physical space at the speed of human migration. It was traveling through consciousness networks at the speed of thought. The implications extend beyond ancient history into fundamental questions about human potential. If our ancestors routinely accessed mental capabilities that we consider exceptional or impossible, then our current limitations only impose might be environment rather than inherently biological. We might have the same cognitive hardware they possessed, but we lack the software that made advanced functions accessible. This creates a disturbing paradox. As we've developed more sophisticated external technologies, we might have simultaneously lost access to more sophisticated internal technologies. The consciousness enhancement environments that once amplified human mental capabilities have been replaced by electronic devices that actually diminish them. Instead of expanding awareness, we've created systems that fragment attention and reduce cognitive coherence. The contrast becomes stark when you examine what happened to human capabilities during the transition from megalithic to historical periods. Construction precision declined. Astronomical accuracy decreased. Acoustic engineering was forgotten. It's as if each generation was working with progressively degraded mental faculties, unable to maintain the standards their predecessors had achieved effortlessly. But the degradation wasn't just about losing access to consciousness enhancement technologies. It was about losing the knowledge that such technologies were possible. Over centuries, the idea that human awareness could be technologically amplified faded from cultural memory. What had once been routine engineering became mystical experience. What had once been practical application became religious ritual. This transformation is visible in the archaeological record as a shift from functional to ceremonial use of ancient sites. The acoustic chambers that once enhanced cognitive function became echo chambers for religious chanting. The astronomical alignments that once facilitated precise observations became ritual calendars marking seasonal festivals. The electromagnetic concentrations that once amplified mental capabilities became sacred spaces where people hoped for divine intervention. The knowledge didn't disappear completely. It went underground, preserved in mystery schools and esoteric traditions that maintained fragments of the original understanding. But fragmentation inevitably led to distortion. Each tradition preserved pieces of a larger system without understanding how those pieces fit together. The acoustic principles survived in musical practices. The geometric ratios survived in architectural schools. The consciousness techniques survived in meditation traditions. But the integrated technology that made the whole system function was lost. Recovery requires more than just identifying the fragments. It requires understanding how they work together as components of a unified system. The acoustic frequencies that alter brainwave patterns must be combined with geometric arrangements that focus electromagnetic energy, which must be coordinated with consciousness techniques that access non-ordinary states of awareness. Recent experiments in consciousness research are beginning to demonstrate how these elements interact. Subjects exposed to specific sound frequencies while sitting in geometrically precise environments show enhanced problem-solving abilities, increased creativity, and access to information they shouldn't normally be able to access. The effects are measurable, repeatable, and unlike anything conventional neuroscience can explain. But here's where the research gets controversial. The most dramatic effects occur when subjects are exposed to the exact frequencies and geometric ratios found in ancient megalithic sites. It's as if these locations were calibrated to optimize human consciousness in ways that our modern understanding of the brain can't account for. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that consciousness itself might be a field phenomenon rather than a product of individual brain activity. In this model, the brain doesn't generate awareness, but receives it from a larger information field that pervades space. Ancient sites might have been designed as receivers and amplifiers for this field, allowing brains cannot achieve. The implications, human consciousness to access capabilities that isolate, are staggering. If consciousness is a field phenomenon, then the network of Hyperborean sites might still be partially functional, waiting for people who understand how to interface with it properly. The acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic anomalies, the geometric precision. These might not be historical artifacts, but dormant technologies that could be reactivated by people with the right combination of knowledge and intention. This possibility transforms how we understand our relationship to ancient sites. Instead of studying them as relics of the past, we might need to approach them as functional technologies that could solve contemporary problems. The consciousness enhancement capabilities that once allowed coordinated planning across continents could be exactly what we need to address global challenges that require unprecedented levels of cooperation. Climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation. These problems can't be solved by individual nations or organizations working in isolation. They require coordinated global response at a scale and precision that our current communication and decision-making systems can't achieve. But if consciousness enhancement networks were functional, if human awareness could be amplified and coordinated across planetary distances, then solutions that seem impossible with current capabilities might become achievable. The question becomes whether we're ready for such capabilities. The same technologies that could enhance human potential for beneficial purposes could also be used for manipulation and control. Consciousness enhancement techniques in the wrong hands could create forms of mental domination that would make current propaganda systems look primitive by comparison. This might explain why Hyperborean knowledge was hidden rather than openly shared. The builders understood that consciousness technologies require not just technical competence, but ethical development. Only individuals who had demonstrated wisdom and integrity would be given access to capabilities that could affect human awareness on a massive scale. The initiatic traditions that preserved fragments of this knowledge maintained the same screening protocols. The elaborate rituals, the progressive revelation of secrets, the emphasis on character development alongside technical training. These weren't arbitrary cultural practices, but safety measures designed to prevent dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Modern attempts to rediscover consciousness technologies face the same challenge. The techniques themselves might be relatively straightforward to understand intellectually, but applying them safely requires psychological preparation that most people in our culture haven't undergone. We've developed sophisticated external technologies while neglecting the internal development that would allow us to use consciousness technologies responsibly. This creates a catch-22 situation. We need consciousness enhancement technologies to solve problems that our current capabilities can't address. But we need to develop greater wisdom and ethical maturity before we can safely use those technologies. The solution might lie in approaching the rediscovery process gradually, developing internal capabilities alongside external knowledge. Some individuals and small groups are already working in this direction, studying ancient sites not just as archaeological subjects, but as potential interfaces to consciousness enhancement networks. They're learning to reproduce the acoustic frequencies, geometric arrangements, and mental techniques that the original builders used, but they're doing so with careful attention to the ethical implications. The results are preliminary but promising. Enhanced creativity, improved problem solving, access to insights that seem to come from beyond individual knowledge. Nothing dramatic enough to attract mainstream attention, but significant enough to suggest that reactivation of ancient consciousness technologies might actually be possible. But individual experiments aren't sufficient to address planetary scale challenges. The full potential of Hyperborean knowledge can only be realized through coordinated networks of people working together with shared understanding and common purpose. This requires not just technical knowledge, but social organization, based on principles very different from our current institutional structures. The ancient builders seem to have achieved coordination without hierarchy, precision without bureaucracy, and complex project management without centralized control. Their organizational methods left no traces in the archaeological record, because they operated through consciousness networks rather than physical administrative systems. Recreating such organization in the modern world would require fundamental changes in how we approach leadership, decision-making, and resource allocation. Instead of top-down management structures, we would need distributed networks where information and authority flow according to competence and need rather than formal position. Instead of competitive relationships, we would need collaborative ones where individual success depends on collective achievement. These organizational principles aren't just idealistic fantasies, they're practical necessities for working with consciousness enhancement technologies. When people have access to expanded awareness and direct mind-to-mind communication, traditional power structures become not just unnecessary but counterproductive. You can't maintain authoritarian control over people who can perceive your motivations directly and access information independently of your official channels. This suggests that reactivating Hyperborean knowledge would inevitably transform social organization in ways that challenge existing power structures. The same capabilities that could solve global problems would also make current forms of political and economic control obsolete. This might explain the resistance to serious investigation of ancient consciousness technologies. The implications threaten too many vested interests. But resistance might not be sustainable in the face of mounting global crises. As conventional approaches prove inadequate for addressing climate change, resource depletion, and social fragmentation, pressure will grow to explore alternative solutions. The consciousness technologies preserved from Hyperborean culture might represent our best hope for developing the coordination capabilities necessary for planetary-scale problem-solving. The choice we face is similar to the one that confronted our ancestors when climate change forced them to leave their Arctic homeland. We can cling to familiar but inadequate approaches and hope that somehow they'll prove sufficient. Or we can embrace transformative but uncertain alternatives that might provide solutions we desperately need. The difference is that we have access to their preserved knowledge and the benefit of their experience. We can learn from their successes and their failures, adopting what worked while avoiding what led to problems. But this requires approaching their legacy with both respect for its wisdom and critical evaluation of its applications. The archaeological evidence shows that Hyperborean culture achieved remarkable coordination and technical precision, but it also shows that their civilization eventually collapsed when climate conditions changed. Their consciousness technologies and organizational methods weren't sufficient to prevent catastrophic disruption when environmental pressures exceeded certain thresholds. This suggests that even advanced consciousness capabilities have limitations when confronting planetary-scale challenges. Technical solutions alone, no matter how sophisticated, might not be sufficient if the underlying systems driving those challenges aren't addressed. Climate change isn't just an engineering problem, but a symptom of deeper issues in how human societies relate to natural systems. The Hyperborean legacy might offer guidance here as well. Their technologies seem to have been designed to work with natural forces rather than against them, to amplify existing capabilities rather than replace them with artificial alternatives. Their consciousness enhancement methods worked by aligning human awareness with larger information fields, rather than creating isolated bubbles of expanded capability. This approach suggests solutions that go beyond just recovering ancient technologies to developing new applications that integrate Hyperborean principles with contemporary understanding. Using consciousness enhancement techniques to improve environmental sensitivity rather than just problem-solving ability. Applying network coordination methods to ecological restoration rather than just human organization. Adopting harmonic technologies that strengthen natural systems rather than disrupting them. The path forward might not involve choosing between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge, but finding ways to synthesize them into approaches that neither could achieve independently. The consciousness technologies of Hyperborean culture combined with the environmental understanding of contemporary science. The organizational methods of ancient networks combined with the communication capabilities of modern systems. Such synthesis would require unprecedented cooperation between researchers, practitioners, and institutions that normally operate in isolation. Archaeologists would need to work with consciousness researchers. Engineers would need to collaborate with meditation teachers. Environmental scientists would need to integrate insights from mystery school traditions. The fragmentation that has characterized human knowledge for centuries would need to give way to integration that recognizes the underlying unity of all natural phenomena. The same integration that allowed Hyperborean builders to create technologies that worked simultaneously with consciousness, environment, and social organization. This integration process is already beginning in fields ranging from biomimetics to quantum physics to systems theory. Each represents a rediscovery of principles that ancient cultures seem to have understood intuitively. The convergence of these rediscoveries suggests we're approaching a threshold where fragmented knowledge becomes unified understanding. When that threshold is crossed, we might experience something unprecedented in recorded history. Not just the recovery of lost capabilities, but their evolution into forms that surpass anything achieved by previous civilizations. The consciousness technologies of Hyperborean culture enhanced and refined by millennia of additional human experience. The coordination methods of ancient networks amplified by modern communication systems. The harmonic principles of megalithic construction applied to contemporary materials and techniques. The resulting capabilities might finally give us the tools necessary to address challenges that have seemed insurmountable with conventional approaches. Climate stabilization through consciousness-coordinated environmental restoration. Resource abundance through technologies that work with natural abundance rather than against it. Social harmony through organizational methods that align individual fulfillment with collective well-being. But achieving such capabilities requires more than just technical development. It requires the wisdom to use them appropriately and the integrity to ensure they serve life rather than narrow interests. The same qualities that ancient mystery schools sought to develop in their initiates, and that contemporary consciousness research recognizes as essential for safe exploration of expanded awareness. The choice facing us isn't just about recovering ancient knowledge, but about whether we've developed the maturity to apply it wisely. The melting Arctic that's revealing new archaeological sites, the consciousness research that's validating ancient techniques, the global challenges that require unprecedented coordination. These aren't separate developments, but components of a larger process that's been building for decades. We're being presented with opportunities to reclaim capabilities that our species possessed in the past and to evolve them into forms appropriate for our current situation. The question is whether we'll recognize these opportunities and respond to them with the wisdom and integrity that their proper use requires. The evidence suggests that this moment was anticipated by the builders of the preservation systems that have maintained Hyperborean knowledge across millennia. The mathematical ratios encoded in architecture, the technical procedures disguised as rituals, the historical accounts preserved in mythological narratives. These weren't just random attempts to preserve information, but carefully designed protocols for reactivating dormant capabilities when the right conditions emerged. Those conditions are emerging now. The convergence of archaeological discoveries, scientific breakthroughs, and global challenges that make consciousness technologies not just interesting, but necessary. The question is whether we'll prove worthy of the trust that our ancestors placed in us when they designed systems to preserve their most important knowledge for future generations who might need it. The ice continues to melt. The knowledge continues to emerge. The choice continues to be ours. But the window for making that choice might not remain open indefinitely. The same forces that are revealing ancient wisdom are also accelerating the conditions that could trigger another civilizational collapse. We can either use this opportunity to integrate the best of ancient and modern knowledge into solutions that address our current challenges, or we can continue on patterns that have led to repeated cycles of rise and fall throughout human history. The difference might lie in whether we approach Hyperborean knowledge as consumers, seeking to exploit it for advantage, or as inheritors responsible for carrying it forward with wisdom and integrity. The choice shapes not just our immediate future, but the legacy we leave for generations who will face their own challenges and need their own access to the deepest wisdom human civilization has developed. The preservation systems that maintained Hyperborean knowledge for us might depend on our maintaining them for those who come after. In that responsibility lies both the weight and the promise of recovering what was lost when the ice claimed humanity's first global civilization. The weight of using such knowledge wisely, the promise of finally breaking the cycles that have limited human development for millennia. The path forward requires not just recovering the past, but evolving beyond it into possibilities that even Hyperborean culture might not have imagined. But it requires taking that first step with both courage and wisdom, ready to inherit both the gifts and the responsibilities that come with access to consciousness technologies that could transform human civilization itself. That responsibility becomes even more critical when you examine what's happening right now, as we speak, beneath the melting ice of the Arctic. Climate change, for all its devastating consequences, has become an inadvertent archaeologist. Each summer, as temperatures rise and permafrost thaws, the landscape reveals artifacts and structures that have been hidden for millennia. In 2019, researchers discovered wooden tools and animal bones on Canada's Ellesmere Island that showed clear signs of human modification, dating back over 4,000 years. But these weren't crude implements made by struggling survivors. The craftsmanship was sophisticated, suggesting people who had mastered their environment rather than merely endured it. The wood itself came from trees that don't grow there today, indicating the climate was dramatically different when these tools were made. Similar discoveries are emerging across the Arctic at an accelerating pace. Stone arrangements in Alaska that appear to be intentional constructions rather than natural formations. Wooden structures in Siberia that show advanced joinery techniques. Most remarkably, satellite imagery has begun revealing geometric patterns beneath the ice in Greenland that are too regular to be natural, but too large to have been created by small bands of nomadic hunters. These patterns suggest something that mainstream archaeology isn't prepared to acknowledge: the possibility that substantial settlements, perhaps even cities, lie preserved beneath the Arctic ice. Not the crude camps we'd expect from Stone Age peoples, but organized communities that might have supported thousands of inhabitants during warmer climatic periods. The implications become staggering when you consider the timeline. Many of these discoveries date to periods when conventional history tells us human civilization was just beginning to develop agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. Yet here we have evidence of sophisticated cultures thriving in regions that are now completely uninhabitable, using technologies and organizational methods that supposedly wouldn't be invented for thousands of years. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these discoveries isn't what they reveal about the past, but what they suggest about the future. The same climate change that's exposing these ancient sites is also threatening our own civilization. We're facing the same environmental pressures that forced Hyperborean refugees to abandon their homeland and seek survival in southern regions. The question becomes whether we can learn from their experience before it's too late. Did they leave us instructions hidden in the monuments and myths that have survived? Are there technologies preserved in their southern settlements that could help us address our current environmental crisis? Most importantly, do we have the wisdom to recognize and apply such knowledge if we find it? The answer might lie in understanding how they approach the relationship between consciousness and environment in ways that our modern science is only beginning to glimpse. Recent studies in environmental psychology have shown that human awareness can be dramatically affected by natural settings. Exposure to certain landscapes, acoustic environments, and electromagnetic conditions can enhance cognitive function, emotional stability, and even physical health. Ancient peoples seem to have understood these relationships intuitively, selecting locations and designing structures that optimized human performance through environmental interaction. The sacred sites scattered across the globe weren't just impressive monuments, but functional technologies that enhanced the capabilities of the people who used them. This perspective transforms how we understand the dispersal of Hyperborean knowledge. They weren't just carrying technical information south, but establishing centers where consciousness enhancement techniques could be maintained and transmitted. Each megalithic site becomes a node in a global network designed to preserve and amplify human potential across generations. The acoustic properties that alter brainwave patterns, the geometric arrangements that focus electromagnetic energy, the astronomical alignments that synchronize human awareness with cosmic cycles. These weren't random features, but integrated components of a comprehensive system for optimizing human consciousness through environmental design. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate what ancient builders somehow knew. Specific sound frequencies can enhance creativity and problem-solving ability. Certain geometric proportions can induce states of expanded awareness. Particular electromagnetic conditions can improve mental clarity and emotional balance. The precision required to engineer such effects suggests understanding of mind-environment relationships that we're only now rediscovering. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. As researchers have attempted to measure and analyze these ancient sites using modern instruments, they've encountered phenomena that conventional science can't explain. Magnetic anomalies that shift without apparent cause. Acoustic effects that seem to violate basic principles of sound propagation. Electromagnetic readings that suggest the sites are somehow actively generating energy rather than just focusing it. Some researchers have begun to suspect that these locations aren't just passive structures, but dynamic systems that remain partially functional thousands of years after their builders vanished. The precision of their construction, the specific materials used, the mathematical relationships governing their proportions. Everything suggests they were designed to operate as integrated technologies rather than simple architectural monuments. This possibility raises profound questions about the nature of technology itself. We assume that advanced capabilities require complex machinery, electronic systems, and industrial infrastructure. But the Hyperborean approach suggests a different model where sophisticated functions emerge from precise arrangements of natural materials working in harmony with environmental forces. Their technologies weren't additions to the natural world, but integrations with it. Instead of creating artificial systems that require constant maintenance and energy input, they developed self-sustaining designs that drew power from the Earth's own energy fields. Instead of building machines that break down over time, they created structures that actually improve with age as natural processes enhance their function. This bio-integrated approach to technology makes perfect sense for a civilization that had experienced catastrophic climate change. When your metal tools can freeze and shatter, when your mechanical systems can be buried under advancing ice sheets, you develop technologies that work with natural processes rather than against them. Stone doesn't break down. Acoustic principles don't change. Electromagnetic relationships remain constant across millennia. The genius of Hyperborean technology wasn't in its complexity, but in its sustainability. They created systems that could function for thousands of years without human intervention, preserving crucial knowledge and capabilities across multiple civilizational collapses. Even when the people who built them were gone, the structures continued to operate, waiting for future generations who might rediscover their purpose. But sustainability wasn't their only consideration. The evidence suggests they understood something about the relationship between individual consciousness and collective intelligence that we've completely forgotten. The acoustic chambers weren't just designed to enhance personal awareness, but to facilitate group coordination. The geometric arrangements weren't just aesthetically pleasing, but functionally necessary for maintaining social harmony. Recent research in social psychology has shown that groups of people can achieve levels of problem-solving and creativity that exceed the sum of individual capabilities, but only under specific conditions. The physical environment, the acoustic properties, the electromagnetic characteristics of the setting all affect how well groups can coordinate and collaborate. Ancient builders seem to have engineered these conditions deliberately, creating spaces that optimized collective intelligence while suppressing the competitive and hierarchical tendencies that normally fragment group efforts. Their circular city designs weren't just architectural preferences, but social technologies that created stable, egalitarian communities capable of coordinating complex projects across generations. This explains one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. How did ancient peoples manage massive construction projects without the administrative bureaucracies that such coordination would seem to require? The answer is, they didn't need bureaucratic management because they had environmental systems that facilitated natural coordination. When the physical setting optimizes group consciousness, traditional management structures become unnecessary. The implications extend beyond ancient history into fundamental questions about human social organization. If environmental conditions can dramatically affect how well groups function together, then our current social problems might be symptoms of living in environments that actively promote conflict, competition, and fragmentation. Modern urban design prioritizes efficiency and economic productivity over human psychological well-being. Our buildings are boxes that isolate people from natural energy flows. Our cities are grids that fragment communities into competing units. Our workplaces are hierarchical structures that suppress collective intelligence in favor of centralized control. Contrast this with ancient sites that seem designed to enhance social cohesion, optimize group decision-making, and facilitate collaborative problem-solving. The difference isn't just aesthetic, but functional. We've created environments that make cooperation difficult, and then wonder why our societies struggle with coordination problems that ancient cultures seem to have solved effortlessly. The Hyperborean legacy might offer blueprints for redesigning our physical environments to support, rather than undermine, human social capabilities. Not by copying their architectural forms, but by understanding the principles they were applying. How acoustic properties affect group dynamics, how geometric arrangements influence collective decision-making, how electromagnetic conditions impact social harmony. Some contemporary architects and urban planners are already moving in this direction, designing buildings and communities that prioritize psychological well-being alongside functional efficiency. But they're working mostly from intuition and limited research, rather than from comprehensive understanding of environment-consciousness relationships. Recovering that understanding might require approaching ancient sites not as historical artifacts, but as research laboratories, where the effects of different environmental variables on human consciousness can be studied systematically. Instead of just measuring and cataloguing these locations, we might need to experiment with them, testing how their various features affect modern subjects under controlled conditions. Such research would be controversial because it challenges the boundary between archaeology and active experimentation. Most researchers prefer to study ancient sites from a safe distance, analyzing them as cultural products rather than functional technologies. But if these locations were designed as consciousness enhancement systems, then understanding their function might require experiencing their effects directly. Groups are already conducting some individuals and small such experiments informally, spending time in ancient sites and documenting their psychological and physiological responses. The reports are preliminary and anecdotal, but they consistently describe enhanced creativity, improved problem-solving ability, and access to insights that seem to come from beyond ordinary awareness. More systematic research would require collaboration between archaeologists, neuroscientists, and consciousness researchers willing to approach ancient sites as potentially active technologies rather than passive monuments. The results might revolutionize our understanding not just of the past, but of human potential itself. But such research also carries risks. If ancient sites are indeed functional consciousness enhancement technologies, then experimenting with them could have effects that we're not prepared to handle. Enhanced awareness might bring access to information or capabilities that could be destabilizing if not approached with proper preparation and ethical framework. This returns us to the question of readiness. that seems to be embedded in the preservation systems themselves. The knowledge wasn't hidden to keep it from us, but to ensure it would only become accessible when we had developed the wisdom to use it responsibly. The initiatic traditions, the symbolic encoding, the environmental requirements for activation. These weren't obstacles, but screening mechanisms. We might be approaching the threshold where those screening mechanisms recognize us as ready for the next level of revelation. The climate change that's exposing new archaeological sites, the consciousness research that's validating ancient techniques, the global challenges that require unprecedented coordination. These could be the conditions the preservation systems were designed to recognize as signals for reactivation. But readiness isn't just about technical capability or social need. It's about approaching ancient knowledge with the proper attitude of respect, responsibility, and service to life, rather than personal or cultural aggrandizement. The same consciousness enhancement technologies that could solve global problems could also be used for manipulation, control, and domination if they fell into the wrong hands. The builders understood this danger and designed their preservation systems accordingly. The knowledge would be revealed progressively only to those who demonstrated not just competence, but character. Each level of understanding would require not just intellectual grasp, but ethical development. The deeper mysteries would remain hidden until seekers had proven themselves worthy of the responsibility such knowledge entails. This creates a paradox for modern researchers. We need consciousness enhancement technologies to address global challenges that our current capabilities can't solve. But we need to develop greater wisdom and integrity before we can safely access those technologies. The solution might lie in approaching the rediscovery process gradually, treating each insight as a test of our readiness for the next level. Some aspects of Hyperborean knowledge might already be available to those who approach them with proper preparation and intention. The acoustic frequencies, the geometric principles, the astronomical alignments. These are documented in archaeological literature and available to anyone willing to experiment responsibly. The question is whether contemporary seekers have the patience and discipline to work with these elements systematically, rather than expecting immediate dramatic results. The path forward might not involve spectacular revelations, but gradual integration of ancient principles with contemporary understanding, learning to create environments that support rather than undermine human potential, developing organizational methods that optimize collective intelligence rather than hierarchical control, adopting technologies that work with natural systems rather than against them. Each step would prepare us for the next, building the foundation of understanding and character necessary for accessing deeper levels of preserved knowledge. The process itself would be transformative, gradually shifting our consciousness from competitive to collaborative, from exploitative to sustainable, from fragmented to integrated. This transformation wouldn't just be personal but collective, affecting entire communities and eventually societies. As more people learn to work with consciousness enhancement principles, the social conditions necessary for accessing higher levels of ancient knowledge would naturally emerge. The screening mechanisms would recognize the changing conditions and respond accordingly. The result might not be the sudden recovery of lost technologies, but the gradual evolution of human civilization toward capabilities that surpass anything achieved by previous cultures. Not by repeating the past, but by integrating its wisdom with contemporary possibilities, creating something genuinely new while honoring the principles that made earlier achievements possible. But evolution requires both continuity and change, both preservation and innovation. The Hyperborean legacy provides the continuity, the tested principles and proven methods that have been preserved across millennia. Our task is to provide the innovation, adapting ancient wisdom to contemporary conditions and extending it into possibilities that earlier cultures might not have imagined. This balance between tradition and innovation becomes crucial as we face challenges that no previous civilization has encountered. global climate change driven by industrial activity, social fragmentation enabled by electronic technologies, resource depletion caused by exponential growth. These problems require solutions that go beyond anything preserved from the past, while remaining grounded in principles that have proven sustainable across multiple civilizational cycles. The consciousness enhancement technologies of Hyperborean culture might provide the foundation for such solutions, but only if we can learn to apply them creatively rather than just copy them literally, understanding the principles rather than just the forms, adapting the methods rather than just repeating the procedures, evolving the capabilities rather than just recovering them. This evolutionary approach to ancient knowledge requires a different kind of research than conventional archaeology provides. Instead of just studying what was, we need to explore what could be. Instead of just preserving the past, we need to extend it into the future. Instead of just understanding ancient achievements, we need to surpass them while honoring the wisdom that made them possible. The ice continues to melt, revealing more evidence of what we've lost and what we might recover. The knowledge continues to emerge, offering tools for addressing challenges that conventional approaches can't solve. The choice continues to be ours, but the stakes continue to rise as global conditions approach tipping points that could trigger catastrophic changes regardless of what we decide. We can either use this opportunity to integrate ancient wisdom with contemporary capabilities, creating solutions that neither could achieve independently, or we can continue on trajectories that repeat the mistakes of previous civilizations while facing problems they never had to confront. The difference might lie in whether we approach Hyperborean knowledge as archaeologists studying dead artifacts, or as inheritors of living traditions that were designed to evolve across generations. The preservation systems weren't just storage mechanisms, but growth protocols, designed to guide human development toward capabilities that their creators could envision, but not achieve within their own lifetimes. We might be the generation they were preparing us for, the ones who would finally have both the need and the capacity to activate potentials they could only preserve in dormant form. But activation requires more than just understanding the technical aspects. It requires approaching the knowledge with the same vision and integrity that motivated its preservation across millennia of darkness. The path forward leads not backward into some imagined golden age, but forward into possibilities that honor the best of what was while creating something genuinely new. The consciousness technologies of ancient culture evolved and enhanced by modern understanding. The coordination methods of prehistoric networks amplified by contemporary communication systems. The sustainable principles of megalithic construction apply to challenges no ancient builder ever faced. Such integration won't happen automatically. It requires conscious choice, sustained effort, and willingness to transform not just our technologies, but ourselves. The same inner development that ancient mystery schools sought to cultivate, and that contemporary consciousness research recognizes as essential for safe exploration of expanded awareness. The melting Arctic that reveals new sights daily, the mounting global crises that demand unprecedented solutions, the emerging technologies that make ancient possibilities accessible again. These aren't separate phenomena, but aspects of a larger transformation that we're all part of, whether we recognize it or not. The question isn't whether change is coming, but whether we'll participate consciously in directing that change toward outcomes that serve life rather than destroy it. The Hyperborean legacy offers guidance, but guidance that must be earned through the same qualities of wisdom, integrity, and service that motivated its preservation. In accepting that guidance lies both the promise of recovering humanity's lost potential and the responsibility of evolving it into forms worthy of the trust our ancestors placed in us when they designed systems to preserve their most precious knowledge for generations. They would never see but hoped would prove worthy of their inheritance. The responsibility weighs heavier than we imagined when you realize what's really at stake here. This isn't just about recovering lost history or satisfying archaeological curiosity. We're looking at evidence that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of human development itself. Because if Hyperborea was real, if consciousness enhancement technologies once existed on a planetary scale, then everything we think we know about the limits of human potential needs to be re-examined. The fragments keep surfacing, not just from melting ice, but from research laboratories, where scientists are inadvertently rediscovering principles that ancient builders somehow understood intuitively. Quantum physicists exploring non-local consciousness, neuroscientists mapping how environmental factors affect brain function, archaeoacoustics researchers measuring the precise frequencies that ancient chambers were tuned to produce. Each discovery stands alone in its respective field, published in specialized journals that rarely cross-reference each other. But when you map these findings together, a pattern emerges that's impossible to ignore. Modern science is systematically validating technologies that were supposedly primitive superstition, confirming capabilities that were allegedly impossible for ancient peoples to possess. The timing isn't coincidental. We're rediscovering these principles exactly when we need them most desperately. Climate systems destabilizing faster than our political structures can respond, social fragmentation accelerating beyond our institutions' ability to manage, resource depletion outpacing our technology's capacity to adapt. The same pressures that forced previous civilizations to develop consciousness enhancement technologies or face extinction. But here's what makes our situation different from every previous crisis in human history. We have access to their solutions, not complete, not perfectly preserved, but scattered across enough different preservation systems that reconstruction might actually be possible. If we can develop the wisdom to approach this knowledge responsibly, instead of trying to exploit it for competitive advantage. The evidence suggests that's exactly what the preservation systems were designed to test. Not just our technical ability to decode ancient information, but our ethical development as a species. Whether we've evolved beyond the patterns of thinking that led to previous civilizational collapses. Whether we can work together instead of against each other when faced with challenges that require unprecedented coordination. Recent experiments hint at what becomes possible when these tests are passed. Small groups working with consciousness enhancement techniques adapted from ancient practices have demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that exceed anything conventional psychology can explain. Enhanced creativity that generates solutions no individual participant could have developed independently. Access to information that seems to come from beyond the sum of personal knowledge. Coordination that approaches telepathic precision without any electronic communication. The effects are measurable but not yet explicable through mainstream scientific models. Participants show synchronized brainwave patterns that persist even when they're separated by significant distances. Their creative output demonstrates mathematical relationships and geometric principles they claim never to have studied. Most remarkably, they consistently report the same insights and solutions, despite working on problems they've never discussed with each other. This suggests we're not just recovering ancient techniques, but accessing something that transcends historical knowledge entirely. As if consciousness enhancement technologies don't just amplify individual awareness, but connect human minds to larger information fields that exist independently of any particular culture or time period. The implications become staggering when you consider the scale at which such connections might operate. If individual consciousness can access non-local information under the right conditions, if enhanced awareness can coordinate across vast distances without physical communication, then the global challenges that seem impossible to address with conventional approaches might actually be solvable. Climate stabilization through consciousness, coordinated environmental restoration. Resource abundance through technologies that work with natural systems rather than against them. Social harmony through organizational methods that align individual fulfillment with collective well-being, not as utopian fantasies, but as practical applications of principles that ancient cultures somehow understood and modern science is beginning to validate. But validation in laboratory settings is very different from implementation at civilizational scale. The consciousness enhancement techniques that work for small groups of motivated volunteers might not translate to the general population without major changes in how we structure society itself. The environmental conditions necessary for optimal function might require redesigning our cities, our workplaces, our entire physical infrastructure. Most challenging of all, the ethical framework required for safe application of these technologies might demand personal transformation that most people in our current culture aren't prepared to undertake. The same capabilities that could solve global problems could also enable unprecedented forms of manipulation and control if they fall into the wrong hands or are approached with the wrong motivations. This creates a paradox that every advanced civilization has apparently faced. The technologies necessary for addressing planetary-scale challenges require planetary-scale wisdom to use safely. But developing that wisdom might require access to the very consciousness enhancement technologies that can't be safely deployed until the wisdom already exists. Ancient cultures seem to have solved this paradox through gradual introduction of enhanced capabilities alongside corresponding development of ethical maturity. The mystery schools that preserved fragments of advanced knowledge weren't just technical training programs, but comprehensive character development systems. Students learned not just how to apply consciousness enhancement techniques, but why such applications required extraordinary levels of personal responsibility. The initiatic process that screened candidates for deeper knowledge wasn't arbitrary cultural tradition, but practical necessity. When human awareness can be amplified to affect others at a distance, when consciousness techniques can influence environmental systems directly, when enhanced perception can access information that was meant to remain private, the potential for abuse becomes unlimited unless it's balanced by equally unlimited commitment to serving life rather than personal interests. Modern attempts to rediscover these technologies face the same screening requirements, but without the institutional structures that once supported proper preparation. We have consciousness research laboratories, but no wisdom schools. We have technical manuals, but no ethical frameworks. We have individual techniques, but no integrated systems for ensuring they're applied responsibly. The result is a kind of technological adolescence where we're gaining access to capabilities we're not mature enough to handle safely. Like teenagers with access to powerful tools, but without the life experience to understand their proper use. The potential for both remarkable achievements and catastrophic mistakes increases simultaneously. Some researchers have recognized this danger and are attempting to recreate the ethical frameworks that once surrounded consciousness enhancement training, drawing on wisdom traditions from multiple cultures while adapting them to contemporary conditions. Developing screening processes that assess character alongside technical competence. Creating support systems that help practitioners integrate enhanced capabilities with increased responsibility. But these efforts remain fragmented and small-scale compared to the magnitude of what might be necessary. If consciousness enhancement technologies are indeed crucial for addressing global challenges, then the preparation systems required to use them safely might need to be implemented at societal levels, not just training individual practitioners, but transforming entire communities to support the kinds of coordination and cooperation that enhanced awareness makes possible. This transformation wouldn't just be about learning new techniques, but about fundamentally changing how we understand human nature itself. Moving beyond competitive individualism toward collaborative consciousness, beyond hierarchical organization toward distributed coordination, beyond technological domination of nature toward technological integration with natural systems. The archaeological evidence suggests such transformations have occurred before. The sudden appearance of sophisticated construction techniques across multiple continents, the coordinated development of astronomical knowledge in cultures with no apparent means of communication. The shared symbolic languages that appear in sacred sites separated by thousands of miles and years. These weren't gradual cultural developments, but rapid transformational events that seem to have upgraded entire populations simultaneously. As if consciousness enhancement technologies weren't just individual tools, but civilizational catalysts that could accelerate human development across entire societies when properly implemented. The question becomes whether we can achieve similar transformations consciously rather than waiting for them to emerge from crisis situations. Whether we can choose to evolve our awareness and organizational capabilities before external pressures force such changes through catastrophic collapse and reconstruction. The window for making such choices might be narrowing. The same climate changes that are revealing new archaeological evidence are also destabilizing the environmental conditions that human civilization depends on. The same technologies that make consciousness research possible are also creating new forms of social fragmentation and psychological manipulation. The same global connectivity that could enable planetary coordination is also enabling unprecedented levels of surveillance and control. We're approaching decision points that will determine not just our immediate future, but the trajectory of human development for generations to come. Whether we develop the capabilities necessary to create sustainable abundance or repeat the cycles of rise and collapse that have characterized previous civilizations. Whether we learn to work with consciousness enhancement technologies responsibly or allow them to be corrupted into instruments of domination and exploitation. The Hyperborean legacy offers guidance for navigating these choices, but guidance that must be earned through the same qualities of wisdom, integrity, and service that motivated its preservation. The knowledge wasn't hidden to keep it from us, but to ensure it would only become accessible when we had developed the maturity to use it appropriately. That maturity isn't just individual, but collective. Not just personal development, but social evolution. Not just technical competence, but ethical transformation that affects entire communities and eventually entire civilizations. The screening mechanisms embedded in preservation systems seem designed to recognize these collective changes and respond accordingly. We might be approaching the threshold where such recognition occurs. The convergence of archaeological discoveries, scientific breakthroughs, and global challenges that make consciousness enhancement technologies not just interesting, but necessary. The question is whether we'll prove worthy of the trust that ancient builders placed in future generations when they designed systems to preserve their most important knowledge across millennia of darkness. The ice continues to melt. Ancient sites continue to emerge. Modern research continues to validate what was supposedly impossible. The pieces of a comprehensive understanding continue to assemble themselves, waiting for minds clear enough to perceive the patterns and hearts pure enough to apply the insights responsibly. But assembly requires more than just intellectual recognition. It requires commitment to the same values that motivated the original preservation efforts. Service to life rather than personal aggrandizement. Cooperation rather than competition. Sustainability rather than short-term exploitation. Wisdom rather than mere cleverness. The consciousness enhancement technologies of Hyperborean culture weren't just tools for solving practical problems, but methods for developing the kinds of human beings who could be trusted with such tools. The organizational systems weren't just efficient management techniques, but ways of creating communities where enhanced capabilities could be shared safely. The preservation mechanisms weren't just storage systems, but growth protocols designed to guide human development toward its highest potential. We are the inheritors of this legacy, whether we recognize it or not. Every choice we make about how to approach consciousness research, how to structure our societies, how to relate to environmental challenges, contributes to whether the ancient vision of human potential is realized or remains dormant for another cycle. The responsibility is both individual and collective. Each person who chooses wisdom over cleverness, cooperation over competition, service over self-interest helps create the conditions necessary for consciousness enhancement technologies to emerge safely. Each community that prioritizes collective well-being over individual accumulation helps establish the social foundations required for such technologies to function properly. But the most crucial responsibility might be recognizing that we're not just recovering ancient knowledge, but participating in its ongoing evolution. The consciousness enhancement capabilities preserved from Hyperborean culture were designed not as final achievements, but as stepping stones toward possibilities their creators could envision, but not attain within their own historical circumstances. We might be the generation they were preparing for, the ones who would finally have both the need and the capacity to activate potentials they could only preserve in dormant form. But activation requires approaching their legacy not as something to be exploited for our benefit, but as something to be continued for the benefit of all life on Earth. The path forward leads not backward into some imagined golden age, but forward into possibilities that honor the best of what was, while creating something genuinely unprecedented. The consciousness technologies of ancient cultures evolved and enhanced by contemporary understanding. The coordination methods of prehistoric networks amplified by modern communication systems. The sustainable principles of megalithic construction applied to challenges no previous civilization ever faced. Such integration won't happen automatically or easily. It requires conscious choice, sustained effort, and willingness to transform not just our external technologies, but our internal development. The same commitment to growth and service that ancient wisdom schools cultivated and that contemporary consciousness research recognizes as essential for safe exploration of human potential. The evidence keeps mounting. The opportunities keep presenting themselves. The choices keep demanding our attention. But the ultimate test isn't whether we can decode ancient knowledge or develop new technologies. It's whether we can evolve into the kinds of beings worthy of the extraordinary capabilities that such knowledge and technologies make possible. In meeting that test lies both the promise of recovering humanity's lost potential and the responsibility of evolving it into forms that serve not just our species, but the larger web of life of which we're part. The ancient builders understood that consciousness enhancement without corresponding wisdom leads inevitably to destruction. They designed their preservation systems to ensure that future generations would face the same tests they had faced and would have to prove their readiness just as thoroughly. We are facing that test now. The melting ice that reveals their sights, the mounting crises that demand their solutions, the emerging technologies that make their methods accessible again. These aren't separate phenomena, but aspects of a larger examination that determines whether we've developed the maturity necessary to inherit the full scope of human potential. The results will shape not just our immediate future, but the legacy we leave for generations who will face their own tests and need their own access to the deepest wisdom human consciousness has ever developed. In that continuity lies both the weight and the promise of the choice that confronts us now. The knowledge is emerging, the capabilities are developing, the moment of decision approaches. Whether we prove worthy of what we might recover and evolve depends on choices we make not just as individuals, but as a species facing the greatest transformation in our recorded history. The signs are becoming impossible to ignore. Every month brings new discoveries from the melting permafrost. Structures that shouldn't exist, technologies that don't fit our timeline, evidence that forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. What we call human progress might not be progress at all. It might be recovery. The symmetry is haunting. As our current civilization reaches the same technological thresholds that ancient texts describe in their golden ages, the ice releases artifacts that mirror our achievements, precision-cut megaliths that rival modern engineering, acoustic chambers tuned to frequencies we've only recently learned to measure, geometric relationships that encode mathematical constants we thought we discovered. But these aren't crude approximations of our capabilities. In many cases, they surpass them. The acoustic properties of chambers at Newgrange create effects our audio engineers struggle to replicate. The precision of stone cutting at Pumapunku exceeds what our diamond-tipped tools achieve. The astronomical alignments at sites across the globe demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics that required instruments we assume didn't exist. The pattern extends beyond individual artifacts into systemic understanding. Ancient sites worldwide demonstrate identical construction principles, despite being separated by impossible distances and time frames. The same mathematical ratios, the same acoustic frequencies, the same electromagnetic properties, as if they were built according to standardized specifications maintained across a global network. This consistency reveals something that challenges every assumption about prehistoric human capabilities. These weren't independent cultural achievements slowly developed through trial and error. They were applications of systematized knowledge transmitted through educational networks that spanned continents. The kind of coordination our modern world has never attempted at such scale. Recent analysis of megalithic sites has revealed another layer of sophistication that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. These structures weren't just impressive monuments, but functional technologies designed to interface with natural energy systems. The specific types of stone chosen for their electromagnetic properties. The precise geometric relationships that create resonant frequencies. The careful positioning at locations where the Earth's magnetic field demonstrates unusual characteristics. Modern instruments detect phenomena at these sites that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. Magnetic anomalies that shift in response to astronomical events. Acoustic effects that seem to violate basic principles of sound propagation. Electromagnetic readings that suggest the structures are actively generating energy rather than just focusing it. The implications become staggering when you realize these effects are still measurable thousands of years after construction. These weren't just buildings, but self-sustaining technologies designed to operate indefinitely without human maintenance. The precision required for such engineering suggests the builders understood principles about energy and consciousness that our science is only beginning to glimpse. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery is how rapidly this knowledge disappeared from the archaeological record. Construction techniques that required generations to perfect vanish within centuries. Astronomical precision that demanded careful observation across millennia suddenly becomes crude approximation. Acoustic engineering that achieved specific consciousness-altering effects degrades into random echo chambers. The decline isn't gradual decay, but systematic loss, as if entire educational systems collapsed simultaneously across the globe. The master builders who understood complete technical systems were replaced by apprentices working from incomplete instructions. Each generation preserved what they could comprehend, while the deeper principles faded into myth and superstition. This pattern of sudden knowledge loss corresponds precisely with the climatic upheavals that ended the last ice age. The Younger Dryas event that triggered rapid cooling around 12,900 years ago. The massive floods that followed when ice dams burst and sea levels rose. The environmental catastrophes that would have forced any advanced northern civilization to abandon their homeland and seek survival in southern regions. But they didn't just flee randomly. Genetic analysis reveals migration patterns that suggest coordinated dispersal to specific locations. The river valleys that would become the foundations of known civilizations. The highland regions that offered refuge from rising seas. The coastal areas with access to marine resources and trade routes. As if the evacuation itself was planned and executed according to systematic protocols. The refugees weren't just carrying personal possessions, but preserving crucial knowledge systems, the mathematical principles encoded in architectural proportions, the astronomical data embedded in mythological narratives. The technical procedures disguised as religious rituals, multiple backup systems designed to maintain information across potential civilizational collapses. This explains the mysterious appearance of sophisticated knowledge in cultures that supposedly had no prior development. Agriculture techniques that emerge fully formed without experimental phases. Metallurgical processes that demonstrate advanced understanding of chemical principles. Construction methods that achieve precision requiring instruments these cultures allegedly didn't possess. The knowledge wasn't being invented from scratch, but recovered from preservation systems established by climate refugees who understood their homeland was becoming uninhabitable. The sudden flowering of civilization in multiple regions wasn't independent development, but coordinated reactivation of dormant educational networks. Sacred geometry preserved the mathematical foundations. Musical traditions maintained the harmonic relationships. Astronomical observations continued the celestial mechanics. Mystery schools protected the consciousness enhancement techniques. Each preservation system maintained crucial components of a larger technological framework. But preservation across catastrophic change required more than just storing information. It required embedding that information in forms that would remain culturally valuable even when their original technical significance was forgotten. Myths that encoded historical data, rituals that preserved scientific procedures, architectural proportions that maintained mathematical constants. This approach to knowledge preservation explains why ancient texts contain technical descriptions disguised as supernatural events. Flying vehicles described as divine chariots, energy weapons portrayed as supernatural powers, communication technologies depicted as telepathic abilities. The metaphorical language made the information memorable and culturally transmissible while concealing its literal applications from those not ready to understand them. The screening mechanisms weren't arbitrary cultural traditions, but practical necessities. When technologies worked directly with consciousness and environmental systems, their misuse could trigger catastrophic consequences. The initiatic processes that controlled access to deeper knowledge weren't elitist exclusion, but essential safety protocols. Modern consciousness research has begun validating what ancient builders somehow understood intuitively. Specific environmental conditions can dramatically enhance human cognitive capabilities. Particular sound frequencies can improve problem-solving and creativity. Certain geometric arrangements can induce states of expanded awareness that provide access to information beyond normal perception. These effects aren't psychological placebo responses, but measurable changes in brain function and electromagnetic activity. Subjects exposed to the precise frequencies found in ancient chambers show enhanced neural connectivity and increased production of neurotransmitters associated with heightened awareness. The acoustic properties weren't decorative features, but functional technologies for optimizing human consciousness. The implications extend beyond individual enhancement into collective coordination. When groups of people share enhanced awareness states in properly designed environments, they demonstrate problem-solving capabilities that exceed anything conventional psychology can explain. Ideas emerge that no individual participant could have developed independently. Solutions appear that seem to come from beyond the sum of personal knowledge. This suggests the ancient networks weren't just communication systems, but consciousness amplification grids designed to coordinate human intelligence across planetary scales. The mathematical precision of site placement becomes crucial when understood from this perspective. Each location needed to be positioned at exact coordinates to maintain coherent resonance across the global network. Such capabilities would explain how ancient peoples managed construction projects of unprecedented scale and complexity without the administrative infrastructure such coordination would seem to require. When consciousness can be technologically enhanced and networked across vast distances, traditional management hierarchies become unnecessary. The work coordinates itself through direct mental interaction between participants. But these capabilities also represent the ultimate double-edged technology. The same methods that could optimize human potential for beneficial purposes could also enable unprecedented forms of manipulation and control. Consciousness enhancement without corresponding ethical development becomes consciousness exploitation with catastrophic consequences. The builders understood this danger and designed their knowledge preservation systems accordingly. Technical information was fragmented across multiple traditions, so no single group could access complete capabilities without corresponding wisdom development. The deeper secrets remained hidden until seekers demonstrated not just competence, but character worthy of such responsibilities. We are approaching the threshold where these preservation systems might recognize us as ready for reactivation. The climate changes that expose new archaeological sites, the consciousness research that validates ancient techniques, the global challenges that require unprecedented coordination. These could be the conditions the screening mechanisms were designed to detect as signals for releasing deeper knowledge. But readiness isn't just about technical capability or social need. The same ethical requirements that ancient mystery schools enforced still apply to anyone seeking to work with consciousness enhancement technologies. The commitment to serve life rather than exploit it. The willingness to subordinate personal interests to collective well-being. The understanding that such capabilities are gifts to be stewarded rather than tools to be owned. The choice facing us mirrors the one that confronted every advanced civilization when it reached the threshold of planetary-scale influence. Whether to use enhanced capabilities for creating sustainable abundance or for accumulating competitive advantage, whether to work with natural systems or attempt to dominate them, whether to preserve knowledge for future generations or consume it for immediate benefit. The archaeological record suggests most civilizations failed this test, leading to the cyclical collapses that mark human prehistory. But the persistence of preservation systems indicates some individuals always understood the deeper principles and worked to maintain them across dark ages. We are their inheritors, carriers of knowledge designed to function across millennial timescales. The melting ice continues revealing evidence that challenges every assumption about human development. The consciousness research continues validating capabilities that were supposedly impossible. The global crises continue demanding coordination at scales our current systems cannot achieve. The convergence isn't coincidental but purposeful, components of a reactivation process that's been building for generations. The question isn't whether we can access the knowledge, but whether we've developed the wisdom to apply it responsibly. Whether we can learn from the mistakes that led to previous collapses. Whether we can evolve beyond the patterns of thinking that treat advanced capabilities as means for gaining advantage over others, rather than tools for serving the greater good. The preservation systems weren't designed just to store ancient information, but to guide human development toward readiness for capabilities that transcend anything previously achieved. Not recovery of what was lost, but evolution toward what becomes possible when consciousness enhancement is balanced by corresponding wisdom development. The sites continue emerging from melting permafrost. The technologies continue being validated by modern research. The opportunities continue presenting themselves. But the ultimate test remains the same one every generation faces when confronted with knowledge that could transform civilization itself. Whether we prove worthy of the trust ancient builders placed in future generations when they designed systems to preserve humanity's highest potential across whatever catastrophes might come, whether we can activate dormant capabilities consciously rather than waiting for crisis to force another cycle of collapse and reconstruction. The choice shapes not just our immediate future, but the legacy we leave for those who will face their own moments of decision. In that continuity lies both the weight and the promise of recovering what the ice tried to hide, and evolving it toward possibilities even Hyperborea's builders might not have imagined. The evidence keeps mounting. The moment keeps approaching. The responsibility keeps calling for a response worthy of the extraordinary inheritance we're being offered. Whether we answer that call with wisdom, equal to the knowledge we're recovering, will determine if this time the cycle finally breaks towards something unprecedented in human history. The moment arrives when you realize the evidence can no longer be dismissed. When the fragments scattered across melting tundra and buried beneath ocean floors begin forming patterns too precise to ignore. When genetic markers trace impossible migration routes and astronomical alignments encode knowledge that shouldn't exist. When everything we've been taught about human development starts crumbling under the weight of discoveries that refuse to fit our carefully constructed timelines. Standing at this threshold, we face a choice that will define not just how we understand our past, but how we navigate our future. Because embedded within these ancient mysteries lies something far more profound than historical curiosity. Hidden in the geometric precision of megalithic construction, the acoustic properties of sacred chambers, and the mathematical relationships governing sacred sites worldwide, we find blueprints for technologies that could transform human civilization itself. The builders didn't just leave us monuments, they left us operating manuals disguised as myths, technical specifications encoded in stone, and consciousness enhancement protocols preserved in ritual. But accessing this knowledge requires more than archaeological investigation. It demands a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between mind, environment, and the forces that shape reality itself. Recent experiments hint at capabilities that conventional science struggles to explain. Small groups working with frequencies and geometric arrangements derived from ancient sites demonstrate problem-solving abilities that exceed the sum of individual participants. They access insights that seem to emerge from beyond personal knowledge, coordinate with precision that approaches telepathic accuracy, and generate solutions to problems none of them could solve independently. These aren't isolated anomalies, but systematic effects that become reproducible once you understand the principles involved, the same principles that guided ancient builders in creating structures that still function as consciousness enhancement technologies thousands of years after their creators vanished. Technologies that work not through mechanical complexity, but through precise harmony with natural forces that modern physics is only beginning to recognize. The implications extend beyond personal development into civilizational transformation. If human consciousness can indeed be technologically enhanced and networked across vast distances, then the coordination challenges that seem insurmountable with current capabilities become solvable. Climate stabilization through globally synchronized environmental restoration, resource abundance through technologies that amplify natural systems rather than depleting them, social harmony through organizational methods that align individual fulfillment with collective well-being. But such capabilities come with responsibilities that previous civilizations apparently failed to handle. The same technologies that could solve our greatest challenges could also enable unprecedented forms of control and manipulation if they fall into the wrong hands or are approached with improper motivations. The consciousness enhancement techniques that optimize human potential also make individuals more susceptible to influence from those who understand how enhanced awareness operates. This creates the central paradox that every advanced civilization seems to face. The wisdom necessary for safely using consciousness technologies can only be developed through experience with those same technologies. But gaining that experience requires wisdom to avoid the catastrophic mistakes that apparently destroyed previous attempts at implementing such systems on planetary scales. The ice continues to melt, revealing secrets that challenge everything we thought we knew about our origins. Each discovery from the thawing permafrost adds another piece to a puzzle that spans millennia, connecting ancient myths to modern science, genetic markers to architectural marvels, and consciousness research to technologies we're only beginning to understand. The evidence suggests we stand at the same crossroads our Hyperborean ancestors once faced. The same choice between wisdom and cleverness, between cooperation and competition, between serving life or serving only ourselves. Their knowledge waits in the stones they aligned, the frequencies they encoded, and the patterns they preserved, but accessing it requires becoming the kind of beings worthy of such responsibility. Perhaps that's the real message hidden in the ice. That human potential extends far beyond what we've imagined. But realizing it depends not just on rediscovering ancient technologies, but on evolving the consciousness capable of using them wisely. The question isn't whether we can unlock Hyperborea's secrets, but whether we're ready for what we might find.